Bloomberg News was first with the head-snapping news today that hacker groups within the Russian government this weekend breached the computer systems of the Republican National Committee. NBC News has not independently confirmed Bloomberg's story. The RNC does say that a third-party IT provider they use had been breached. They're denying any of their data has been compromised, though. That said, tonight, the New York Times appears to be matching Bloomberg's reporting, saying, quote, early indications are that the culprit was Russia's SVR intelligence agency, the group that initially hacked the Democratic National Committee 6 years ago. If those early indications are right, and this is Russian security services hacking the computer systems tied to the Republican National Party, the National Republican Party, I mean, that's a big, hairy deal, right? The Russian government attacking American political parties after all we've been through? And just 3 weeks after Biden and Putin met and supposedly had their big confrontation over this kind of thing? The reported attack on the Republican Party hit at about the same time that a Russian-based organized crime group calling itself REvil claimed responsibility for a ransomware attack on a U.S.-based tech firm. They're demanding $70 million as ransom in that attack. REvil was also behind the attack that shut down the big meat processing company JBS last month, you might remember. But REvil has also been attacking all sorts of high-profile targets on U.S. soil for more than a year now, hitting like a law firm that worked with all sorts of celebrities and big corporations like Apple and schools, even green energy companies. Their cyber attacks, along with the attacks of other organized Russian criminal groups, led to that fairly bold confrontation just under a month ago between President Biden and Vladimir Putin. In that meeting, Biden says he told Putin that because these criminal attacks were originating on Russian soil, that these Russian criminal groups were effectively operating with impunity from Russia. He says he told him that Putin was effectively responsible for these attacks and that if the U.S. determines that attacks like these are going to continue to happen, we would respond. Again, this weekend, before this REvil group took responsibility for this latest big cyber attack, this ransomware attack, President Biden doubled down again, saying if the attacks were determined to be from Russia, he, quote, told Putin we would respond. Well, what about now? What if it's not just organized Russian criminal groups giving Putin some degree of deniability, but if this reporting from Bloomberg and the New York Times is right tonight, that it's also Russian security services targeting U.S. political entities, again, how do we respond now? What should we expect? Joining us now is New York Times cybersecurity reporter Nicole Perlroth. Nicole, it's nice to see you. Thank you for making time tonight.
Thanks, Rachel.
It does feel like these are sort of, well, I don't know if they're twin attacks or parallel attacks. The timing of these two attacks being so close to one another does feel suspicious, given that this REvil group appears to operate from Russia, and the RNC attack appears, at least at initial glance, to be from Russian government hackers. Do you think it's right to look at these as potentially linked?
I don't know if they're linked yet. You know, the thing about REvil is that the ransomware attacks never stop, but they're getting a lot worse. What is clear, though, is that I think we're being tested. You know, Biden laid out a big red line during the campaign and said he was putting Putin on notice that he would not tolerate any form of election interference. And that appears to be something along the lines of what we're seeing right now with a breach of a contractor used by the RNC. Although we don't know if the RNC was the end target or collateral damage. So those are the questions we're asking. Now, in terms of the ransomware, they just had this summit, as you just described, where ransomware was at the top of the agenda. And Biden said, here's a list of 16 critical sectors. If you hit with a disruptive ransomware attack, we will respond. Well, over the 4th of July weekend, we saw one company in one of those critical sectors get hit with ransomware in a supply chain attack where not only were their customers hit, but their customers' customers were hit. So far, the impact in the United States seems to be muted. We haven't heard about a lot of American targets. But in Sweden, a grocery chain had to shut down 800 stores. Their railways were affected. Their pharmacies were affected. And this is precisely the kind of attack that Biden called out in that summit just a few weeks ago.
What is the general understanding in the field about what the U.S. government means when it says we will respond? What is what's in the arsenal and what is actually deployable. I'm not up enough on what cyber offense looks like to know what the U.S. government might do if, in fact, Biden decides to back up his words with action.
Well, until now, we've responded largely with sanctions and indictments, and that never really gets us anywhere because clearly it's not a deterrent. And as we all know, Russia doesn't extradite its cyber criminals, so they enjoy safe harbor there. So the question is, what's next? And the problem is that U.S. systems are still so vulnerable that every time we try to prepare some kind of response for a Russian hack, whatever it is, whether it's election interference or ransomware, we're always coming at this from a position of, but what will Vladimir Putin do? Because we're still so vulnerable here. And so that really hamstrings our response. But some of the options that have been thrown out there are things like, why don't we take out the lights in Russia? And there's been this very short of war conflict between the U.S. and Russia over the years. My colleague David Sanger and I broke the story a couple of years ago that Cyber Command was hacking into the Russian grid and making a very loud show of their access to say, hey, we're here. If you turn off the lights or do something seriously disruptive to the United States, we'll turn around and turn your lights off too. Some of the other options that have been discussed is a leak of Putin's financials or a leak of some kind that would expose the kind of corruption that Putin fears with Navalny. And the goal would be to create 3,000 Navalnys. And then we have pulled off a series of attacks, small cyber strikes, things like we've taken out a ransomware group's infrastructure ahead of the election last year because we were worried they would lock up voting infrastructure. Or we actually hacked into the computers at the Internet Research Agency, which is where Russia's trolls were sending out a lot of their divisive messages to Facebook and other social media. And I don't know exactly what the messages said, but they said something like, we know who you are. And if you meddle with our upcoming election, in that case, it was the 2018 midterms, we will come for you. So, I think there is a working group at the State Department right now with the US, some 19 other countries that are coming up with a menu of consequences and trying to figure out, where is the threshold for these attacks and where will we respond beyond the usual low-level diplomatic penalties?